Good morning. Welcome to Samuel, Saul, and David. I'm David McMillan. Glad you could be here. Before we start our class, let's start with a quick prayer. Father God, we love you and we thank you for blessing our lives. Thank you for giving us safety here. Thank you for this church and the relationships that are represented here. Thank you for your son who died for us. Thank you for your word and the lessons we can learn from it, and help me to recall the best parts and help everybody to learn a little bit, including myself. Pray all this in your son's name. Amen. All right. Today's lesson is called Iron Sharpens Iron, and we're basically moving on in the story of the life of David. Our review, let's do a little bit of a review. Last week we learned that Jonathan was becoming a leader in the army of Israel. Eliab, that's David's oldest brother, had the right look of a king, but David had the right kind of heart. David was ruddy, good looking, and the Lord was with him. David played the lyre and soothed Saul when he was in a foul mood. Eliab thought David had a wicked heart, but only the Lord looks at the heart. David wanted no man's heart to fail because of Goliath. He wanted to bring hope. David prevailed and won a victory with the help of the Lord. Now, at some point during this series, I'm going to try to go over some of the things that I had to rush earlier on. Since it's the first time through this material, trying to learn the timing. But that day is not today. We're going to see if I can get a lesson done in 40 minutes. It'll be amazing if I can do that. We'll see. All right, we'll start off with the first thing I've learned that I think is kind of interesting. This lesson is about Jonathan, in case you haven't figured it out, but Jonathan was not about David's age, as most people might think. And Jonathan was a soldier. Numbers 1-2 suggests soldiers should be at least 20 years old or older. Now, I know Jonathan was technically a prince, so maybe he started a little early, but even let's say he started 15, he's still going to end up being quite a bit older. Saul ruled for 40 years, according to Acts 13:21, and Jonathan and Saul died together, so that would make Jonathan at least 60 at that time, if he was 20 years at the start of that. And there is some debate on that number, but it clearly says 40 years in Acts, so let's just accept that number for now and as a pretty accurate number. And really, in all honesty, it doesn't matter. The trick is, Jonathan is not, even though Jonathan and David are really good friends, it's not your standard friendship because you're talking about a much older man with a much younger man. So it's more of a mentorship. Okay. There's the last part. David was 30 years old when Saul died. And this is a little bit of speculation here, but Jonathan had no son for most of the time of those 40 years. So David was probably like the son he wished he had. When he saw him out there on the field defeating Goliath, he recognized something in that act. He saw a person that had the same kind of faith in God and the same kind of fearless courage to jump out when no one else would. And that's when the light clicked for Jonathan and David. Remember Jonathan back in 14. Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, "Come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few." So you see that same kind of spirit that David had is right there. This was several years younger or earlier. David was probably still wasn't in his service yet as far as Saul's service, but they had that same kind of attitude. And Saul said to him, this is right after Goliath, "Whose son are you, young man?" David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite." As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him, so that Saul set him over the men of war. And this was good in the sight of all the people and also in the sight of Saul's servants. So this is an unusual scene. You're wondering what's going on here. Well, let's look at it a little bit. First of all, we remember in the story of David and Goliath, Saul promised that he would offer his son or his daughter Merab as a wife to whoever would fight Goliath. That was number one. Number two was that they would pay no taxes. They'd have, for the rest of their life, the family would pay no taxes. As far as we know, unless, it's not recorded in the Bible, so we'll just assume Saul never made good on that promise at all. Second thing, exchanging armor or clothing was a common way of sealing a new friendship. And even though it seems kind of strange, it's sort of like just one of those things to welcome somebody into the army is you exchange armor. And in this case, David, being a very young man, probably didn't have anything to give back, so we're assuming that Jonathan just gave him his stuff, which was really a pretty big honor. Now, Eliab had scorned David, and Jonathan had honored David. Jonathan now saw David as an equal in the battlefield and respected his love of the Lord. Jonathan gave David the kind of respect he wished his brother would give him. To me, here's one of the keys if you want to understand David and Jonathan. David was the youngest child and got no respect. The truth of the matter was, his father didn't even really consider him as one of his sons the first time around. He had to go, oh, I forgot, I've got that 8th son out in the field with the sheep. And so David never had a lot of family respect. And so when Jonathan did this thing for him, suddenly David saw himself in a new light. He saw himself as somebody that had significance. He saw himself as somebody who was contributing. He saw himself in a whole new light. So suddenly the light clicked on for David. This is great. I wish I had this my whole life. I'm just now getting this. Now, the verb kashar, which is in that verse there when it says knit, it means bound in love, like Jacob's soul was kashar to the soul of his youngest son, Benjamin. And when I was reading that whole part, I had to throw in this verse because I thought this is kind of odd, this verse in Colossians, how it mirrors all this. And above all these, put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. So it's love can unite different kinds of people, and there's just a lot of different kinds of love. We get a little bit confused sometimes when we see the word love used so often. The truth of the matter is, the Greeks had it right when they divided it into several different words. The Hebrews also only had one word, so it gets real confusing. But the truth of the matter is, we need to have love one for another, especially in the church. And this is a good model to go off of when we look at it in detail. Okay, what else happened after Goliath? As they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tambourines, with songs of joy, and with musical instruments. And the women sang to one another as they celebrated. Saul had struck down his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very angry, and this saying displeased him. He said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they've ascribed thousands. And what more can he have but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day on. Really, in all honesty, to me, this is a very significant verse when you're studying this part, because to me this is one of the things that kicks off the animosity between Saul and David specifically. This is the first time Saul has seen David as a threat. Saul has you remember Saul has met David before, even though the verses right before this almost seem like he's never seen David before. What happened before this, I've kind of left it out. His uncle, who was also the general of his army, his name was Abner. He said, "Who's the guy that killed the Philistine? Bring him to me." And and this is what happened. He was introduced, and he received all this honor from Jonathan. He had not really considered David that much. Maybe he had just forgotten about it. But now he saw David as a threat to the throne. Okay. I did a lot of research on this, and we just have pictures. I put no words up. But harps and lyres. You've probably always heard that David played the harp, but it's actually a lyre. What's the difference between a harp and a lyre? Does it really make any difference? It may not make that much difference, but it's one of those things that's always bothered me about this particular passage, and I'll explain that in a minute. But if you're looking here at harps are a lot bigger. A harp is at least 3 feet tall. Normally, when you're going to play a harp, you see this lady, she's sitting down with a harp on the ground. That's more likely how a person playing the harp would be playing it, with the harp on the ground. And probably most likely, from what I've read, there's so many different kinds of harps, believe me. I've gone way down this rabbit hole. But most likely, it's one of these sort of boomerang-shaped harps. Now, the lyre, which is what he actually played, is probably closer to about 2 feet tall. You could hold it about like yay. Now, there's 2 ways to play the lyre. You can hold it with one hand, play with one hand, or you can also, they actually make a little strap so that you can play with both hands, a little strap around your wrist, and it holds on to that basically this outer part. Now, see, on a harp, you can't grab anything over there because there's not anything on that side. But really the main difference, I mean, if you like instruments, is that a lyre has a sounding board. So a lyre is more like a guitar. It has that sounding board where the sound vibrates off. Now, is this that important? Well, it's important for me because there's some things that happen just right immediately now. The next day, a harmful spirit from God rushed upon Saul, and he raved within his house while David was playing the lyre. And as he did day by day, Saul had a spear in his hand, and Saul hurled the spear at David, for he thought, "I will pin David to the wall." David evaded him twice. I still, in all honesty, I'm not quite satisfied. How did David evade a spear throw at close range? It still baffles me. That's one of the reasons why I'm so obsessed about this harp lyre thing. A harp, he could not do that. If he had a harp in his lap, it would be impossible. But a lyre, he could possibly throw that out of the way, maybe use it as a shield. But this happened several times, and the truth of the matter is, I really shouldn't worry about it too much because, right, the Lord was with him, right? So the Lord definitely helped him evade him, but I have a hard time picturing it in my head. All right. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but he had departed from Saul. So Saul removed him from his presence and made him a commander of 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David had success in all his undertakings, for the Lord was with him. And when Saul saw that he had great success, he stood in fearful awe of him. But all of Israel and Judah loved David, for he went out and came in before them. We're starting to see the development of the anger that Saul has for David, and the coming weeks it's going to be more evident. But let's do a quick, before we get too much further into the story, a couple of main things to remember here. I've got everything listed, but Saul's daughter, the oldest daughter is Merab, and the youngest daughter is Michal. Now, those are important in this lesson. And Abner a little bit. You'll learn a lot more about Abner. He's a good character in the whole story. I'm actually very fond of him. All right. Saul is angry at David now. He sees him as a rival for the throne because of this great feat of killing Goliath. So, what does he do? Well, he has plans. His plans to kill David are traps based on David's pride. The first thing he did was he made him a commander of 1,000 men. What was the result? He had success, and Saul dreaded him. Not so much his pride really there, but just putting him in a greater sense of responsibility than he's had before. All he's done is won a one-on-one battle. He hasn't commanded people before. It would be a good chance for him to be killed. He did not get killed. Then he offered Merab, which is the older daughter, as a wife, if he battled the Philistines. And David felt he wasn't worthy of this honor at all. So that didn't work. The next offer was Michal. And it's known that Michal loved David as a wife. He felt he wasn't worthy for that at all. That was just a start. He thought, well, if I offer Michal, he'll fight the Philistines for me, he'll get killed. So since he said he was not worthy, Saul said, bring back proof of killing 100 Philistines as a bride price. So what did David do? He killed 200, brought back proof, and got married. And at that point, Saul became David's enemy. Now, that's another step in the evolution of Saul's hatred towards David. I think, well, we'll see. Well, let's read the story, and I'll show you a little bit. Here's how David's humility beat the trap. With Merab, David said to Saul, who am I? And who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But at that time, Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David. She was given to Adriel, the Meholathite, for a wife. With Michal, and Saul commanded his servants, speak to David in private and say, behold, the king has delight in you, and all his servants love you. Now then become the king's son-in-law. And Saul's servant spoke these words in the ears of David. And David said, does it seem to you a little thing to become the king's son-in-law, since I'm a poor man and I have no reputation? Saul's plan was to appeal to his pride, because that was something Saul understood. Saul had a lot of pride. Saul started out as a very humble person, but as he rose to power, it kind of went to his head. He understood the pride motivation. David was still humble. But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually. Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. So here's David's fame growing. And Saul spoke to Jonathan, his son, and to all his servants, that they should kill David. Just flat out. Go ahead, kill him. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore, be on your guard in the morning, stay in a secret place and hide yourself. Now I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where you are, and I will speak to my father about you. If I learn anything, I'll tell you. We'll stop here and just take a second and look. Let's look at David and Jonathan. What is it that they have in common? What is this bond that's formed? It's kind of obvious. When you look at 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 18, where I said was one of the best descriptions of David, basically they meet up on every point except for this first one, is skillful playing the lyre. Now, when David was in the palace playing the lyre for Saul, I'm sure Jonathan saw him there. But Jonathan really saw no connection. Here's a guy playing the lyre. I'm a soldier. I could care less. When he saw him on that field out there facing Goliath, suddenly it clicked. He goes, look, this guy is a lot like me. He's a man of valor. He's a man of war. He's prudent in speech. Jonathan wasn't quite as prudent in speech as David was, but they both had good presence. They both had the charisma, and the Lord was with both of them. So they're almost carbon copies of each other. except for the age, 30 years older. And Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul's father, said to him, "Let not the king sin against his servant David, because he has not sinned against you, and because his deeds have brought good to you." Saul listened to the voice of Jonathan. Saul swore, "As the Lord lives, he shall not be put to death." And Jonathan called David, and he was in his presence as before. Saul has a lot of amnesia when it comes to threats against David. You'll learn that throughout this thing. And Jonathan has this ability to talk Saul out of almost anything. So I really look at Jonathan and David's relationship here as part of God's providence in action. The fact that those two met, those two became friends, they had a sort of a mentorship relationship that worked out in a lot of ways. Here you see Jonathan preventing Saul from carrying out his plans. Most likely, Saul had so many plans against David. Saul tried so often. It's kind of amazing that David ever got out of it. And next week I'm going to highlight some of these a little bit because I think it's been more evident even since he's been anointed, the fact that it's taken several years to get to this point. Saul wanted him gone the second that Samuel said to him, "Your kingdom has been torn away." Because you've got to remember, Samuel, before he went to anoint David, Samuel was worried for his life. He said, I don't want to anoint anyone. How am I not going to be killed? And he said, and God told him, hey, let's just do a sacrifice. That'll be a good cover. So it's really interesting when you look at the providence of getting David into that throne. All right. So then a harmful spirit, Lord, came upon Saul as he sat in his house with a spear in his hand. And David was playing the lyre. And Saul sought to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he lured Saul so that he stuck the spear into the wall. And David fled and escaped that night. So that, I think the third time was a lot closer. He got it in the spear stuck in the wall. I still can't imagine that. And really, in all honesty, it's a miraculous escape. But I mean, in my mind, it looks like a cartoon. I can't make it seem real. But I think I've learned a lot more about liars anyway. And evidently, and the truth of the matter is, evidently ancient lyre is becoming popular now. You can actually buy an old style lyre, and they have online courses, so feel free, knock yourself out if you want to learn the lyre. But it's a very beautiful instrument. Okie doke. Saul sent messengers to David's house to watch him, that he might kill him in the morning. But Michal, David's wife, told him, if you do not escape with your life tonight, tomorrow you will be killed. So Michal let David down through the window, and he fled away and escaped. Michal took an image, a lot of translations say an idol, and laid it on the bed, put a pillow of goat's hair at its head, and covered it with clothes. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. Then Saul sent the messengers to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed, that I may kill him. And when the messengers came in, behold, the image was in the bed, and the pillow of goat's hair at its head. Saul said to Michal, why have you deceived me thus, and let my enemy go, so that he has escaped? And Michal answered Saul, he said to me, let me go. Why should I kill you? To me, glad I didn't fall down. This could be a critical point. I'm not 100% sure. Just remember one thing. Michal was Saul's baby girl. I think Saul really thought a lot of Michal because he was reluctant in offering her, even though she was younger. But here Michal says, hey, he was going to kill me. And I just think that any father if they hear that even if they're married, if the husband says he's going to kill you, it's going to create some tension there. So David fled to Naioth and Ramah. I'm going to go ahead and read this story. I was going to leave it out. It's a little bit weird. Saul sent messengers to Ramah. Samuel was leading prophets prophesying. And when the messengers got there with the prophets, the messengers started prophesying. This is another weird little providential thing. So Saul sent another group of messengers. When they went to Ramah, they started prophesying. So nothing was getting done. So Saul went himself. He started prophesying. But the weirdest thing about it is he stripped off his clothes. And I can imagine Samuel going, hey, look, we don't do that here. Go away. And he ended up falling asleep. It's kind of comical, but it's actually, really, when you think about this is another little providential step. Because here, Saul could have gotten him pretty easily, because Ramah's not that far away. But it was this confusion with the messengers that made it interesting. So I wish the last part wasn't in there, that whole stripping thing was really. But I think it's an interesting story. Now, one thing about Naioth, and this is some background information. They say he went to Naioth and Ramah. Naioth may have meant living places or dwellings. So it's perhaps a hut of a school of prophets, which Samuel presided. Now, that's straight off Wikipedia. But it sure seems reasonable, right? That if you remember in the story, when Saul was anointed, there was prophets involved. There was obviously quite a bit of prophets in that area. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that Samuel was teaching, because he had promised to not stop teaching. So it wouldn't surprise me at all that there was a small group of prophets there. This is looking ahead. I'm going to go ahead and just throw this out because this verse gets mentioned a lot. This is after Jonathan's death. David wrote, I'm distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant have you been to me. Your love to me was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women. Very pleasant. The Hebrew naim, used to describe goodness or kindness. Extraordinary is from the root pala, which is commonly used to describe divine acts beyond comprehension. What he is trying to say here is that Jonathan and David's relationship was very important to David. Now, at the time when David wrote this, he had two wives. Two wives. Two wives makes marriage a lot more challenging. I can only imagine that they had their conflicts, as they were demonstrated later. One thing about David, I feel like if he had trouble in his marriage, he realized that there was always another wife around the corner. He ended up with 8, which is more than you need. But imagine if you thought the best way to settle your marriage problems was to create a competition. That's sort of what's going on here. And so when he says his love for Jonathan surpassed the love of women, he really didn't get that. His relationships with his wives weren't all that great. But David's relationship with Jonathan was steadfast and conflict-free because of mutual respect. There's one thing I want you to realize that everybody in here really wants. Respect from peers is something that creates a feeling of significance and contribution, which is a big need for many people. That's one of the things, and I don't want this to be a sore spot. One of the things a lot of people have trouble with when they retire is that right there. Because I've known a lot of people that have retired, and they're like, what am I going to do? I just don't feel like I got anything to do. And I understand that. And it's like, I've tried to counsel people. It's like, I don't know. I plan on watching TV when I retire. But, because I'm really good at that. But, I can also understand that feeling of wanting a place where you belong. I can also understand that feeling of like, hey, I'm important, I contribute. Jonathan gave David that. And his dad didn't even care hardly that he was there. He was just another shepherd. So when he says that his love was extraordinary, surpassing the love of women, understand what perspective that's coming from. You're talking about a bigamist at the time who became a polygamist. So David did a lot of things great. He is a poor model role for a husband. Then David fled Naioth and Ramah and came and said before Jonathan, "What have I done? What is my guilt? And what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life?" And he said to him, "Far from it, you shall not die. Behold, my father does nothing, neither great or small, without disclosing it to me. And why should my father hide this from me? It's not so." Jonathan didn't buy it. But David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes." And he thinks, "Do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved. But truly, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do." Now this is to me, this little exchange is David and Jonathan in a nutshell. David said to Jonathan, "Behold, tomorrow is a new moon, and I should not fail to sit at the table with the king, but let me go that I may hide myself in the field till the third day at evening." Now, I'll explain these day things in a minute. "If your father misses me at all, then say, 'David earnestly asked leave for me to run to Bethlehem, his city, for there is a yearly sacrifice there for all the clan.'" Unfortunately, there's a lot of lying in the story. You're just going to have to get used to it. "If he says, 'Good, it will be well with your servant,' but if he is angry, then know that harm is determined by him. Therefore, deal kindly," let me get some water there. "Therefore, deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant with the Lord with you. But if there is guilt in me, kill me yourself, or why should you bring me to your father?" It's really a rather dramatic speech, quite frankly. And obviously, David was really panicked. This is Jonathan's reply. It's a really long reply. I edited out a lot of this stuff. And in honesty, if you're reading through it, you may have a little trouble. So hopefully I gave you the best parts here. "If I am still alive, show me the steadfast love of the Lord, that I may not die." This is Jonathan's reply. "And do not cut off your steadfast love for my house forever." Now, what is Jonathan's concern about this whole thing? They're both in the same pickle, aren't they? Saul and Jonathan. Saul's going to lose the kingdom. Jonathan is the prince. He would be the next king. What is Jonathan's concern? He does not want this to ruin their friendship. He wants there to always be, he doesn't want something silly like the throne to come between a good friendship here. And if only Saul could see the same thing. "On the third day, go down quickly to the place where you hid yourself when the matter was at hand, and remain beside the stone heap, and I will shoot 3 arrows to the side of it, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a boy, saying, 'Go find the arrows.' And if I say to the boy, 'Look, the arrows are on this side of you, take them,' then you are to come. For as the Lord lives, it is safe, and there is no danger. But if I say to you, 'Look, the arrows are beyond you,' then go, for the Lord has sent you away. And as for the matter of which you and I have spoken, behold, the Lord is between you and me forever." Very dramatic moment. It's kind of funny, though, the whole signal thing, because the truth of the matter is they just went and saw each other anyway. But, it makes it a better story, I think. And it's what they did. But, all right. Now, what is this thing about 3 nights on the New Moon Festival? New Moon, just one night. Basically, their calendars weren't very precise. And so when it was time for the New Moon Festival, they would plan to celebrate it the day before the new moon, in the sense that they planned to they did their planning. So the first night, there was no light in a normal month, no light. And then the second night was supposed to be the new moon. Well, what if they were off? What if they were off a day? Well, we'll go ahead and have a new moon festival that night, and we'll do it again tomorrow night because we missed it. And so basically, that's why we had a 3-day. When I first read that, I was like, that was only supposed to be a one-night festival, but it's a 3-day festival because they could never figure out when it was going to be. So they always did it the day before and the day after, and some months they were so far off they had to have an extra day in there. So this was one of those months. So if that helps you. All right, so what happens on day one of the festival? So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon came, the king sat down to eat food. So, like I said, it's, why have a one-day festival when you can have a 3-day? Especially when it's just like a banquet. Let's do that, 3 days. King sat on his seat, as at other times, on the seat by the wall. Jonathan sat opposite, and Abner sat by Saul's side, but David's place was empty. I love this next part. This is my favorite part. Yet Saul did not say anything that day, for he thought, something has happened to him. He's not clean. Surely he is not clean. He was just basically thinking the worst there. Take that to mean whatever you want it to mean. But there's several ways you can be unclean. I think he was thinking the worst. He thought, yeah, that's that David. He's unclean. He can't even be here. But on the second day, the day after the new moon, David's place was empty, and Saul said to Jonathan, his son, why has not the son of Jesse come to the meal, either yesterday or today? Jonathan answered him, David earnestly asked leave of me to go to Bethlehem. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan. Here's where you see how far this has gone. Saul has kind of lost all his redeeming qualities at this point. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. How can you insult your son by insulting your wife? And I do not know why you've chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame and to the shame of your mother's nakedness. It's a horrible thing to say to your son. For as long as the son of Jesse lives on the earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Don't you understand? This is messing up the kingdom thing. Therefore, send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die. All right. So what's Saul's motivation? Really, the trick of this, ever since Samuel said, hey, this kingdom's going to be torn away from you, Saul's been planning on a way to circumvent God's judgment. He thought, well, go ahead and say that, Samuel. You just watch me. I'm going to keep that kingdom. And he does his best. And he starts getting paranoid to the point where his oldest son, his confidant, his advisor, he's starting to say some really nasty things to him. And the funny thing was, he just said he was at a festival. Why is he jumping all over Jonathan about this? Just because he's not sitting at this meal? It's crazy. And this is where we start to see this obsessive behavior in Saul. One thing about Saul, nothing ever comes out exactly the way it's supposed to. He tried, but even when he's prophesying, he ends up stripping. He just didn't have it. Jonathan is not going to de-escalate this. For those of you who work in retail, you've been taught properly when someone comes to you angry, not to reflect angry back, because that just makes it worse. Jonathan was not working retail. Jonathan answered Saul, his father, why should he be put to death? What has he done? But Saul hurled his spear at him to strike him. So Jonathan knew that his father was determined to put David to death. At this point, we've had 4 spears chucked, and no one's been hit. Saul's either terrible at spears or just he telegraphs his moves. He's so angry, he's blind. Whatever it is, I just don't want to be anywhere close to him without a shield or a suit of armor. And Jonathan rose from the table in fierce anger and ate no food the second day of the month, for he was grieved for David because his father had disgraced him. You bet his father had disgraced him. His father had disgraced him and his mother, everybody else. This was a festival. This was a family gathering. He's disgracing the mom right there at holidays. This is like that really bad family gathering that everybody has one Christmas or one Thanksgiving where something bad happens. It's a horrible deal. And when the boy came to the place the arrow had been shot, Jonathan called after the boy and said, "Is not the arrow behind you?" And as soon as the boy had gone, David rose from beside the stone heap and fell on his face to the ground about 3 times. And they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. Jonathan said to David, "Go in peace, because we have sworn, both of us, in the name of the Lord. The Lord shall between me and you, and between our offspring and your offspring forever." And he rose and departed, and Jonathan went to the city. To disagree without conflict implies patience and trust. Jonathan did not believe that his dad Saul would harm David, but he gave his friend the benefit of the doubt and vowed to find out, because David did not agree. David believed Saul wanted to kill him, but he gave his friend leave to find out the truth, because Jonathan did not agree. Jonathan and David pledged to be family friends forever. They trusted each other to work out their differences, and they wanted that trust to continue. The verse is, iron sharpens iron, and one man sharpens another. If you'll notice that's a honing rod and a knife. Some people have said, you take 2 knives and you push them together and that sharpens them. No, you don't. You'll get 2 really bad knives. You need a honing rod. Honing rod, it just sits there and takes it, straightens out that knife. Sometimes if you got a good friend and you want to be a good friend for them, you give them the benefit of the doubt and you just sit there and take it. And you straighten them out and let them do the same for you. I think there's patience and trust is really important. All right, let's just end with this. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you. You know, the churches of Christ were known as being a kissing church, where you get a holy kiss here. There was a lot of kissing in there, and it bothers some of us because we're so used to thinking kissing means romance. But, kissing used to mean you're my family. It's a formal greeting. And the reason I have so many verses here is because that's all the people they were supposed to kiss. Here's the thing. Church needs to feel, when you come to church, it needs to feel like you're going to a family reunion, because this is your family, right? It's like, hey, I hadn't seen you for a week. I'm so glad you're here. If that's how church is, and that's how church is supposed to be. Amen? That's a good lesson right there. So one thing, we may not have kisses, but we sure have that feeling of family. Here's our review. I kind of got through, not really. But, it's just one of those things. I need to start doing a 15-minute lesson, and I just blab a lot. But thank you very much for your time. And don't forget, next week, 21 through 25:1.